let us get started because time is precious. And a quick introduction about myself. I'm Akosh. I'm the CEO of Airtime. Airtime is an end-to-end user engagement platform empowering small and medium-sized tech companies to validate user needs and stakeholder priorities. I run this webinar series with exceptional product leaders to learn about their best practices and tricks that they've come up with in their careers. And today I have the honor to welcome Lior Revivo, who's VP Product of OpenWeb. And before I do any more talking about introducing you, I think I'll just hand over the mic and let you say a few words about yourself and your company and your experience and product.
All right. So hi, everybody. Thanks, Ash, for the intro, and nice to meet you all. So I'll do it real quick about myself. So as a product manager and an entrepreneur, I've spent the last decade, 11 years, crafting product users love and businesses rely on. Along the way, I've founded 2 startups. One was sold and led teams across the globe, basically from US to Asia to Europe to Israel in 3 different companies. I've had the privilege of working in super exciting projects like OpenWeb, for example, where we help publishers host and build thriving social communities on site, where we have around 150 million monthly active users. Also worked on fintech products, like helping companies manage their crypto the same as they do with QuickBooks for regular fiat money, and New York Fashion Week, and etc. More and more products along the way. I've got promoted 3 times in 3 different companies to be the VP of product and lead the product in those companies. Had also the privilege of learning from industry experts and from product to business to strategy to storytelling, and also made as much as I can to help others as a mentor in different programs. Outside of work, first of all, I'm a father. I have 2 beautiful kids. One is hopefully coming. I love sports since I remember myself. I've been playing 13 years soccer, and then I moved into marathons, gym, you name it. I'm a huge fan of Real Madrid. That's an important something to remember. And everything around sports and technology is something that I'm really interested in. And I also have a podcast. Well, it's in Hebrew, but it's a podcast that talks about sports tech. So, and I think that's basically it. This is who I am.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. And I hope we didn't shy away all the Barcelona fans who are listening and watching us.
And for those who do like Real Madrid, it's a big day.
But they already won the league, right? Yeah. What I want to understand from you and what I'd like to get your opinion on is that many companies get insights from product usage, complaint tickets, social media posts. There's this large quantity of data points that they get from their users. And how does user interviews play a role in that? What justifies the time spent on user interviews?
So yes, user interviews do require more time than analyzing events or tickets. But if you think about it, product companies have basically 2 types of goals, right? So there's one to optimize and improve existing products, existing features, right? And in some cases also deprecate some of them. And the second goal is to discover future innovations, right? What's going to be next? What it is that we need to build next? And if you drill down into those 2 types of goals, you understand that for the first one, to optimizing and improving existing products and features, yes, analytics, posts, surveys, whatever this is super important, right? They give you the signal of where's the problem or where's the opportunity may be. But in order to understand not just what is the problem that we want to address, but how to address it, right? You have to dive deeper into the needs and the alternatives of users to addressing that desire or specific job to be done. So that qualitative information has to be done by diving deep with our customers and users on how to address the opportunities or problems that may arise from the the raw data. So this is for the first goal. And the second goal of discovering future innovations, honestly, I think that you have any chance of succeeding in that if you don't do proper market research, understand the trends very well, and also conducts many user and customer interviews to be able to build a strategy of what you want to do next and what would be the most important, product or feature to be releasing next. So I think it doesn't matter how you look at it, investing the time in talking to customer users is valuable and irreplaceable, basically, to be able to truly get to product market fit and get the business moving forward.
Yeah. I read an interesting article today. It was a survey. 1,700 product managers were surveyed on what they spend their time on. And they said on average that they spend about 8 hours a month talking to users, and more than 40 hours a month in meetings, and 30 hours a month answering emails. If you ask one of your product managers and they told you this is the split of the time they spend, how would you react?
Wow, I think this is one of the challenges that every company has today. The amount of emails, Slack messages, threads, and discussions and handling tickets, this takes so much time. But I think at the end of the day, when you look in terms of, yes, we all product managers ideally want to have more time talking to customers and users, right? That's our goal. But yes, reality comes in and we have a lot of meetings and a lot of stuff. And then we prioritize who do we want to talk, and usually do it when something important is coming up. So I think in an ideal world, you would like to have as a bulk inside your calendar, ongoing and recurring meetings with customers and with users, even if you don't have something big coming up. So try to make it a ritual, right? Something that's in part of your calendar and not per project in interviews.
Yeah, making it a habit. But then
Exactly.
let's get deeper and plunge into this topic of user interviews, because you yourself did a lot in your product career so far. And first thing, could you tell us how you prepare for your user interview? What do you do before you go into an interview?
Yeah, so I'm going to put aside the user testing, right? I'm going to focus on customer interview specifically. And there's no specific one size fits all, because it changes based on the type of interview. Sometimes it's like discovery interviews, some of it's like talking on specific features. But there is one thing that is a must, right? And before going into interviews, I ask myself one question, and the one question is pretty simple, right? What would be considered a successful meeting? What I define as success. It can be validating hypothesis or learn about specific behavior it needs to be able to start collecting and connecting the dots and seeing specific trends. But understanding what is the goal and what would be considered success, this allows me to understand what type of questions I want to ask, right? And I think this is the most important stuff. Before you go into interviews, understand what we consider the success, because otherwise you're wasting your time and the user or customer time, and you just don't want to do it, because the next time they wouldn't want to talk to you, right? Because it probably wasn't as productive as it should have.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that you set up your goal. What is it that you define as success? Then you write your questions, and then you can even do a sanity check. Am I covering all the goals with the questions that I know?
Exactly.
Okay. Excellent.
Exactly.
So in terms of let's talk about let's say there's an interview which runs for 1 hour. You have 1 hour airtime. No pun intended now. 1 hour airtime with your user. How do you structure that discussion, and how do you split the time that you dedicate to different parts of this interview?
All right. So when I do user interviews, I break it into 3 sections, right? So there's the intro, the introduction, and there's the main discussion, and there's the closing. So the intro, basically, the goal of the intro is to do a few things. First of all, build the connection. I want to make the other person eventually feel comfortable opening up to me, right? Because we're starting to have some kind of relationship and we're breaking the ice. But it's also important not just to break the ice and build a connection. You want to build your status as a professional. People always want to feel important, and they want to know that they're spending time with the people in charge, right? I'm talking to someone who can actually do something with the feedback it gets. So I need to build my professional status in those meetings. And it's super crucial to set the expectations right, because people are worried about of things, and your interview is not the most important thing that they have on their calendar. And you want to make sure that there's no surprises in their back of the mind, and they know exactly what to expect, and they know how much time it's going to take. So then they can shift the focus on you and reduce the internal stress level of what's going to come up next. I also, before I start, by the way, in terms of introduction, I always make sure that the other side understand that there is no right or wrong answers. And the reason it's important is because people don't want to be perceived as stupid, right? They want to make sure that they provide the good answers. So I want to make sure that they need to feel comfortable telling everything they have on their mind. And there is no right or wrong questions. Whatever they give me, this is super valuable. And I want to make sure that they understand that. So this is the introduction section before I start the main discussion.
Okay, excellent. Can you dive into the other sections as well? Because I think it's super valuable to go through that.
The main discussion, this is the money time, right? This is where you have a specific amount of time to make sure that you achieve your goals and make the most out of this conversation. And this amount of time, first of all, I want to make sure that I'm speaking like roughly, right? 20% of the time, listening 80% of the time. It's not about me. If in the introduction, I speak more, and in the closing, I speak more. When it's time to learn, I mostly ask questions and I listen, okay? And I make sure that I do not provide my own thoughts and feedbacks and opinions. And I want to avoid the pitfalls of, yes, I'm right, or I'm wrong, or whatever this is. I don't want to shape what the answer will be. So I mainly ask questions. When I ask those questions, I do not compromise on making sure that I truly understand what they're asking, like what the need is. Okay, and I do it in two ways.
So if they don't answer clearly, you dig deeper and go into the why spiral, or
exactly. And when they're providing answers that I'm not necessarily clearly understanding, so I'm asking like clarifying questions. Can you please tell me more about that? What do you mean by that? But eventually, when I want to wrap up a question, regardless of which question was it, I want to make sure that I truly understand what they told me. So I'm telling them basically, just to make sure that I understand, this is what you were referring to. This is what you're looking to achieve. And the goal is that when they're saying, yes, that's right, that's correct, now I know I understand what they're talking about. I don't want to assume that I understand. I want to validate that I understand. And I do it every time I finish a question. I'm sure that I ask a question and I truly understand what you're talking about. At the end of the main discussion, I do two things. I will tell you one of it, and the second I'll tell you a bit later. So one of it is I leave room for open feedback. So is there anything that you think it's important for me to know, or do you want to share that we didn't cover? Sometimes you'll be surprised of what interesting things come out of that, because you asked the question before and she said something that raised something, and then, okay, interesting insights can come up out of that. So there's always room for open feedback. And there is one question that I always ask, which we will talk about a bit later, of how do I make sure where I want to put the focus on and how to prioritize all of the feedback that I got. And lastly, the closing section is basically to make sure that whatever the goal was, I lead it to the next steps and follow-up. But it's important for me to end the interview and, in a good impression to build future relationships. So thanking the user, but not just thanking, telling them why their feedback is so valuable, right? It's important to remember that they spend the time to help me. So I really need to give them the ability of understanding why was it so valuable, I'm doing a quick recap of the interview so they know what we talked about, and then setting expectations for a future follow-up if needed. This is basically the 3 sections of how do I run the user interviews.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. There are, I think, like one of the Achilles heel of user interviews is the questions that we ask and the way we formulate questions. And you can get like completely misleading insights and feedback from users. And I was wondering, like, have you like crystallized some questions that you think that you really like to ask and that they've been proven helpful for you to learn from your users?
Yeah. So there is no like, cookbook for what questions you should ask in any interview, right? Because it changes. But I think there's a couple of things that I do recommend to follow. First of all, making sure that all questions are open questions, unless you're going to the validation step that you want to make sure that you understand. So the question is yes or no, basically, but focus on open questions, right? So then you can lead and dive into the problem. Center all of your questions around the goal of the meeting, right? Then you'll be able to formalize the right questions. But in time, when you do more interviews, you understand which questions are working better, which questions are working, not as expected. But if you ask me what are the 3 things I would not skip in any interviews, I would first of all make sure that, as I mentioned, validate and understand by making sure that I understand. That's 1. Leave time for open feedback. And the one thing that I always ask, regardless of what type of meeting is it, and is to me the most important one, because let's think about user interviews or customer interviews. We usually get in those discussions a lot of feedback and a lot of insights and a lot of questions, right? Sometimes we are being, like we have a conversation with a partner or like a customer, and they're giving us a lot of the feature requests. As a product manager, my goal is to understand priorities, what will have the most impact. And I've saw many product managers leaving interviews having a lot of information, a lot of insights. And when you ask them, what is the most important thing that they want to focus on, then suddenly there's silence. They're not really. So in order to avoid that pitfall, every time I finish asking all of the questions and I got all the information I needed, I stop and I ask the partner, like the customer, what if you can have the ability to stop everything that all of the engineering team is doing right now and ask us to develop only one thing? What would that be? And when I ask that, suddenly you see on the customer face, they're going back and they're starting to think about the feedback that they provided me, trying to think about all of what they told me. And they're ideally giving them, like, they're telling me what is their priority, the most important one. And by the way, I validate that. I'm telling them, okay, if I understand correctly from all of the feedback that we discussed today, we could do only one thing, this is it. If they're saying yes, now I understand. Sometimes they're saying, you know what, no, this one is more important. But I do not end customer interviews without that question.
Yeah,
once I really understand the priorities, I can start connecting the dots in a larger scale and have more confidence of my next steps.
So I like this question of yours because I think a classic limitation of user research is that you get answers to the questions that you ask, but how can you make sure that you're asking the most important questions from the user's perspective? And there's always a blind spot, irrespective of how many years of experience you have or how good you are at your job. There's always a blind spot. So having a question that helps you shed some light, it's super valuable. Now let's talk about
it does magic. It does magic, I can tell you.
Yeah. There's another thing I wanted to ask you about. It's a critique I hear every now and then about interviews, that users tell you one thing, but they do another thing. So it's what they tell you is not really reliable. And the first thing I'm curious, what I'm interested in is, why do you think users would do that? Why wouldn't they just say what they're going to do?
Yeah, there's the saying that users tell you what they want, but not necessarily what they need, right? I think, first of all, human beings are complicated. No, it's a complicated machine, and there are many reasons why they do that. But I think that the main reasons for that is, first of all, it doesn't cost them money to provide feedback, right? They can say whatever they want, but when they need to, credit card or decide which product to use, then there's a cost for their decision and their feedback. So giving feedback is free, and this is one of the reasons that they do that. The other one is social desirability bias, right? We as people, we want to be part of tribes, and we want other people to like us, right? This is our nature. And sometimes customers would say something just sometimes to please us. I assume that, there's sometimes they have incomplete information, they have, sometimes limited self-awareness, whatever this is. But this is my guess. Why would they say one thing and do the other thing?
And knowing that you're sitting on the other side and not everything that you hear may be like the true opinion of the user, do you have any techniques? Do you have any ways to sort of increase your confidence that what you heard is actually close to what people do?
Yes. And I think confidence is the word here, because there's no 100%, there's no guarantee for nothing. It's only about increasing our confidence in our decisions. But if you think about it, right, as product managers, our goal is to understand the needs, prioritize them, and focus us team on the right opportunities. And when I say opportunity, to me, is the one thing that I like the most from everything I read up until today, is I would like to focus on things that have high importance for our customers, right? But also their alternative are not as good. Because when you repeatedly, or you would like to do something that is a high value of yours, and the alternatives for you to do that are not as good, or sometimes very bad, or even not existing, this is where I perceive as opportunity I want to attack, right? So sometimes I can get a lot of feedback on something that is coming back and is very important to my customers, but I know that they have a lot of alternatives to achieve the same goal. But what if they're giving me something that is very important, but they don't have an alternative for that? So this is where I want to focus my attention on. And I think this will create higher adoption of whatever I'm building, whether it's a new product or existing features improvement. This is the sweet spot, the opportunity zone. And this is basically one of my ways to increase my confidence and chances of success eventually.
Okay. From what I heard, it sounds like it's all like an opportunity scoring exercise, no? Where you understand how important it is for the user, and how is the current experience with the solution that they have, and if you see a big gap, okay, that's yes, where you make a big difference.
Exactly. I would add to that the frequency of the problem, because sometimes there is something that is very important and no alternatives, but something that they do once a month or once a quarter. I do want to focus on things that have high frequency. This is usually where the opportunity or the pain is bigger.
Yeah. All right, Lior, I have a last question for you, and I think this study has been overquoted over the last decades, that when we look at how information through communication comes across, then it's 55% nonverbal, 38% vocal, and 7% words. And I think there's a tendency when we do research. Let me just talk about myself so I don't generalize. Let's say when I do it, I also tend to focus on what people said and analyze the words and the notes of that. But there's a lot that goes missing with that, and I'm interested if you have any ways of capturing that, anything that is not captured in the words that are in the transcript?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a good question. So I think that different people have different types of talking. Some people are more verbal, some people are less verbal. Their tone changes. So I don't have like a one size fits all in terms of what's the right body language or tone of voice, but I do pay attention to two things. First of all, I want to make sure that they are at the moment and they're focusing on me. So when their body language or their tone or their focus is shifting, I know that they're not with me, even if they're taking their phone. I want to make sure that when I get those signals, I want to focus them again on the interview. So I want them to be with me. So this is one thing that I pay attention for. And the second thing, and this is by far couldn't be, faked. When people talk about things that they care about, you see it. They become more descriptive, they share examples, they give you more details. Suddenly they're very fluent, and you even feel some kind of emotion. So you can feel their pain or whatever they're talking about when they're talking about something that really matters to them. So I want to understand when in the conversation, the level of interest rise, the level of the user or the customer I talk to suddenly peaked. By the way, there's a correlation between what like this to the last question I'm asking, what is the most important to you? Correlation between of them, because when people care about something, they just can't fake it. If I need to think about three things that I want people to remember from this interview. So I would remember three words, right? Prepare, learn, and prioritize. And when I mean prepare, understand what is your goal in each meeting? What will be considered a success? This is one. Second is make sure you truly understand the customer's responses. And if you don't, ask clarifying questions. And to make sure that you understand, validate that you understand. Just to make sure I understand, this is what you're referring to. So make sure you learn. And lastly, prioritize with the one question that matters to me is what if you could choose one? So if you make sure that you do this, you will improve in time with understanding which questions to answer, because this is science by itself. But the things that are important that you will be able to conduct effective interviews and leave those interviews with confidence, these are the three things I want you to remember. Hope that makes sense to me.
Absolutely, and thanks a lot for the recap. I want to throw the first question at you, and it's about even before an interview, like how do you make sure that users are interested in talking to you? Like I let you read through it, but it's about how do you get users on the call ultimately?
Wow, that's a good question. Give them a lot of money. No, I'm just kidding. So first of all, not all users want to talk to you, and it's okay. Don't take it personally. But eventually, people, again, I'm always coming back to people want to feel important. Okay, so I'm putting aside customers or users who don't really care about your product. Okay, but there's a sizable amount of people who do care about it. So I want to make sure that when I reach out to them, whether it's through in-app pop-up emails, or some of them can be in my Slack community, I want to make sure that, first of all, again, remember they're building the status. They want to know that they're talking to someone important that can make a change out of this feedback. And second of all, I'm telling them what is the goal, right? What should they expect and why it's so valuable. And I expect to have a good % of conversion, right? The hardest thing is to build a habit of having a cadence of always talking to users, because not always people want to talk to you twice. Maybe they do, but it depends on the cadence. So make sure they understand who you are, why you're reaching out to them, why their feedback is important, what's the goal of the meeting.
Okay,
and you can use ChatGPT to craft emails like that, and it will probably be amazing. So,
but and in terms of the second part of the question is about the length of the session, and do you see like any, like, firstly, the question is about like a minimum length of the session, and then secondly, is it maybe easier to get users, that's my add-on, for shorter meetings than longer ones?
Mm-hmm. So again, I think 15 minutes is too short regardless. So the question is whether it's 30, 45, or 1 hour. And then that depends on what you're trying to achieve. So let's say, for example, I want to get feedback from existing users on specific features. Okay, for that, maybe 30 minutes would work because I have enough time, they understand the context, they know the product, they know the feature, and I can extract all the information I need in 30 minutes. Sometimes I want to talk to customers or prospect or about discovery. Like I want to understand what's the next thing that I should work on. And then it's maybe telling them about the company, telling them about the product, giving them context about myself. This takes time. And for that, you might even need an hour because you're going to a discovery and exploration. But if I had to choose one number for all customer interviews, I would choose 45 because it's right in between, right? So if it's specific features and the user is already familiar with what you're doing and you want to collect feedback on those, 30 minutes is good. If it's the rest, I would choose 45.
Yeah. I'm smiling a little bit because also there's the science of, if you provide 3 options to people, people tend to pick the one in the middle and not one on the side.
The only option that you want is when to meet them. This is because you have that as well. Like you don't ask them how much time.
Yeah. Okay, but like questions are coming in, and so I'll stop myself talking. And let me put on the other one. This is super interesting also from Harriet about like talking to the same user more, or talking always to to other users that you haven't talked to.
Okay, so it depends. First of all, if it's customers, you usually talk to customers, often, right? So ideally you want to talk to them often, because if you don't, they probably not really care, not really using your product. So customers are usually people you talk to them often, some of them more, some of them less. It can be for showing the roadmap, getting feedback on the roadmap, whatever this is. But for users, like if you're a B2C or a B2B2C, this is more challenging because you're asking people who don't have any stakes. They don't have any what's in it for me in those conversations, right? They're just regular users. Then it's become more challenging. In most cases, I would talk to them once, or at least once every specific period of time. But it happens that I end up interviews with wanting to learn more about something, and then I can set a follow-up meeting. It changes based on the goals. But if you create a recurring cadence of meetings, usually you will meet one person each time, not the same people.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Like, unfortunately, there's no black and white answer here as well. But yes. I think we gave like a good context and like food for thought, or to look out when you make this decision. The next question is from Brian. It's about evaluating opportunities.
How do you evaluate opportunities, or okay, good question. So it depends. To validate opportunities in domains that you haven't discovered yet, this is a longer process, and it's not just about talking to users. Is going to those meetings with deep understanding of the market you're looking to address and the trends of this market. I can tell you that I've been doing a lot of, new vertical expansion research, and then you go to different verticals, trying to understand them. And in time, you collect and understand what you're trying to achieve. And then if you work systematically with the opportunity scoring that we discussed earlier, I think you are able to understand what are the opportunities. But if you do discovery, it's not just about the opportunity. It's about the business, the vision, the business model. So there's tons of information that is outside of the interviews themselves. And I wouldn't cover them because it's going to take a long time from now. But in terms of, again, like evaluating the opportunities, when you talk to many people, and many customers, you start seeing the same things coming over and over again. Okay, and assume that you have 20 customer interviews, and you end all of those customer interviews with the one question that matters, and 9 times you get the same priority. 9 times people tell you this is the most important. You just know it, right? You just feel it. You just need to understand. Don't place all your bets after 1, 2, or 3 customer interviews. You need to do them a lot to gain the confidence you need, and then it's just there. If you follow the method that we discussed today, you just know.
Yeah, you see.
Place it on the scoring board, but
yeah.
You understand.
So I have a very different next question from Minesh, and it's about AI's impact on your job. What are your thoughts about this?
Wow, it's a challenging question. I think that AI is exciting, is also frightening, right? We don't know what we don't know yet, and we didn't think that we have what we have right now 2 years ago. But I think AI for the foreseen future would be able to be a complementary service for executing things. Product management as a whole is a super complicated position. You need to work with so many stakeholders. You need to connect the dots with various domains, and some of them are not even quantitative. It's qualitative, from talking to people, understanding trends. So I think understanding and setting strategies, understanding what to do next, these are the human capabilities that will remain. It will help me do things that I can invest less time in. But if you ask me in general, what's the threat of AI in like 5 years from now? I think that we will see a lot less junior positions, in my opinion, whether it's product, whether it's engineering, because AI will be so advanced that it can easily replace junior positions. And I think this is not something I would like to see, but unfortunately, this is where I believe it's going.
I think this is like, it could be a topic for a separate seminar, like how AI can be used in research. I love this topic. So I have the next question from Kimberly, which is about synthesizing interviews, right? That's one of the most time-consuming parts of doing research.
So I think we covered it. Like, how do I know what to build next, right? To me is, again, recap, making sure that every time I speak to customers, I truly understand the feedback that they're giving me, and prioritizing the requests and the feedback. Once I do that across multiple, interviews, I have good confidence of what I need to do. But by the way, sometimes I don't, because things are different. I don't see trends. Like, the same thing doesn't keep coming. Then I continue doing more. But sometimes not being confident is also confidence. If I did the method and if I did the right interviews for the right amount of time, and I don't have a specific correlation that I'm feeling strong about, that means that there's probably something that I shouldn't pursue until I learn more about it. And it's also good.
I have the last question, which is about balancing interactions between users. So, and let me paraphrase it. So user researchers, they talk to users, PMs, and I also see another comment, designers. To what extent should they also be engaged with users compared to a user researcher?
I don't think there's a specific balance. Designers would want to talk to users for a certain goal, right? To making sure, like user testing, and my designs follow what we're trying to achieve. PMs, its goal is a bit different than user researchers and designers. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, when we build our roadmap, we're going back to the team and we're putting their focus on the most important parts, right? And it's a combination of a lot of stuff. It's not just user interviews. Interviews is a crucial part of that. But we want to make sure that we don't overload the same customers with repeating, right, interviews. Sometimes we can combine them, but these are sidetracks. Like, see what I mean? Like, the design team has their own way of doing that. The PMs, it's not necessarily overlaps in many cases.
Okay, I see a +1 question from Juliet, and this is I'm gonna throw it up here because I think it's an interesting one.
So basically, you're asking how many people from my side should attend
from your team, exactly.
Usually, I personally don't like to have many people, and it depends. But I think 2 is a good number of people, and the reason I'm saying 2 is because sometimes I might miss something that the other person can remember, and vice versa, right? Having 2 people, first of all, to me is not too much. It's not too little because I have another year on the room, but it also gives the interviewer a feeling that, okay, I'm important. There's more than one person investing the time. So like, I usually love to do 2, not more than that, unless like there's multiple people on both sides and we have to deal with it in a way. But 2 is a good number.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, just to share that my practice, I also do like these kind of interviews in Duo. And it's always very fascinating for me that after an interview going into doing a recap, and I typically ask, okay, so what are the 3 insights that you have, 3 things that you learned today? It differs. It differs from the things that I picked up, and the other person simply, picked up other relevant information from there. And I find it really useful that you have a sounding board and somebody to check. Bias something that you missed. So it's definitely to be good, and 2 is a good number. Sweet. Lior, thanks a lot. I think this is the end of our session. I'm very, very grateful for having you here, and we learned so much. So hope to stay in touch, and best of luck to you.